Getting started with OSCAL. Lula tutorial, kind of an approach for the latest release of Lula as of the recording of this video, 030, including the ability to generate component definitions. And so as a precursor to that statement, when you're encountering the need to want to get started with OSCAL, I think a lot of people will commonly come across a scenario, right? And a scenario such as this where I need to capture controls A, B, and C, whatever they may be, from a given standard or benchmark X, and those relate to a component Y of my system. And if you've looked at OSCAL and you're familiar with it, you'll know that there are a variety of models available to us that allow us to start to capture data in some way, shape, or form that we can then use as a source of truth rather than duplicating for sake of capturing that. And reuse here is incredibly valuable and important. And so a catalog is where the standard exists. A component kind of exists downstream from that, where you're saying, okay, well, here's a component of my system or of many systems that I may field and be responsible for the compliance data surrounding them. How can I capture that data in such a way that is modular? Those modular pieces can make up a system, and you can pull them into your system security plan and then be able to use all that data downstream for assessment activities. So when you encountered the scenario such as that and you want to get started with OSCAL, we spoke to the modularity of components. We kind of start with what are our dependencies, a catalog. Where does the standard exist? Is it available in OSCAL? Lula is an OSCAL native tool, so we kind of require that catalog to be available in an OSCAL model. If we look to an example such as 853, the OSCAL content repository does maintain multiple revisions and formats available for this catalog in particular. The requirement here for Lula and to get started with your journey here is just to grab the raw URL to that catalog. And then once you have it, we can get started. And so again, looking at Lula here, we have Lula version v030. This included an update for generate component, which then allows us to get started. I have no files in this directory. I have no OSCAL available. I have no compliance data captured as of yet. Where do I start? And I think the best place to start is to start looking at the components that comprise your system and start to capture data anytime you encounter this scenario. Hey, these controls relate to this component from this standard. How do I capture that? How do I maintain it? How do I keep it up to date? And so this is a workflow that we're really looking to continue to build upon, as well as maintaining some of the other models downstream. And so you'll see this is part one of probably many part tutorial as we start to build out capabilities for maintaining different models. And so generate component requires a catalog source link. This is the link that we captured earlier. This is just the raw link. You don't have to copy the file. You don't have to manually copy and paste pieces in between. You just say, hey, here's where the catalog is located. This could also be a local source file if you had a copy of this file locally. From here, we would then say, okay, well, which component am I looking to capture information from? And you could have an instance where maybe we'll do it for our service mesh. Here's our service mesh component, and we'll say controls AC3 and AC4 are applicable. Now, that's still a manual activity. Somebody still has to manually say or map these controls are applicable to this component. Lula doesn't do that for you. That's a very ominous and tedious and I'd say task that needs to be done and vetted by a human. But once you've done that mapping, maybe you already have this information locally to you. Then you can establish, okay, well, I want to create this in OSCAL. I want to maintain it in OSCAL, and I want to use this OSCAL downstream for other things as I start to build out SSPs and perform automated assessments, which is another superpower for Lula. And so I've captured my catalog source. I've captured the component that I want to create a component definition component for, and the controls that are applicable. With that, you have everything you need to get started with building OSCAL. So we run that. It creates a new file for us. In that file is where you can see we have a new component definition. It contains our service mesh component. Awesome. It contains the controls that we identified come from the catalog. It also contains information from the catalog that is automatically mapped here. And this is important because now you have the way to start importing information that you think is important to the way that you want to establish your controls. And so this is information straight from the catalog. Here in the description is a templated section where you could then say, like, my service mesh has sidecars for implementing MTLS, and you could put other information regarding your system specific implementation. That's great. I now have this file. It was generated with automation. It was manually modified as I wanted to collect information that automation can't necessarily collect, that context, nuance, other details that are important to how this control is met that may be important for your auditors downstream. And so I've now captured one component. If you wanted to capture many components, you could certainly do that in separate files. For sake of collecting things in a single location that I can store in version control, I could think about things like, okay, well, I want to add a component. This could be something like my runtime security. I would capture AU3 and let's do AU2 and AU3. So I've identified now I want to generate another component. It's runtime security component with AU2, AU3. We've generated that. What you will see is I still have maintained one file. You could output these to separate files if you so choose, but depending upon where you store this information, you may get a lot of value out of a single file artifact containing the information that you believe is relevant to capture your compliance needs, as well as downstream assessments that will then occur, whether automated or manual. And so I have two components here. The bottom component is our original service mesh component. The one above that is our new component, our runtime security. I automatically generated UUIDs. You can see that our control IDs match our requirements that we passed in, and we also mapped a given statement about the things that this control or component should be doing for a given control. Not only have we generated that information, but we've also retained manually modified information, which is extremely relevant. This needs to be a hybrid workflow of adding context where you can with automation or with human in the loop. And so in this regard, now we have multiple components described. We have multiple controls per component described, and by using automation, we can continue to maintain this file without needing to spend the time doing the tedious pieces, updating UUIDs, updating when we published it versus when this was last modified. You'll notice those timestamps are not the same because we created the service mesh component initially, and then when we generated the runtime security component, we modified it, and the last modification then took place at a separate timestamp. And so in this regard, this was a tutorial for how you can, one of many, get started with building and maintaining OSCAL with Lula today. Thanks for joining.